Republicans and Democrats have promised us the world. Medicare for all, no child left behind, equity, safer streets, and police reform, an end to the housing crisis, a more peaceful world, and a sound economy. Government is the barrier to all of these things.
If you're sick of the lies, fancy slogans, and broken promises, then join us in the Libertarian Party of California and help bring a real free market to the Golden State and help set every individual free. Visit ca.lp.org. That's ca.lp.org. Hello, and welcome back to Libertarian Los Angeles. I'm host Sean Osborne. If you like the show today, please subscribe, like, and leave a message wherever you're watching or listening. And enjoy the show, hopefully. On today's show, what we're going to do is we're going to try to answer a question. Should libertarians vote for Steve Hilton? And to answer that question, I have Steve Hilton on the show today. How's it going, Mr. Hilton?
I'm very, very honored and happy to be with you. It's a great question. It's the question. Because with the Libertarians, I know that we can do this. We can save California from the clutches of this insane far-left machine that's driven our state into the ground these last 16 years of one-party rule.
Yeah, it is really pitiful to see what's happened to the state. I know some libertarians, might be on board, and some might be a little bit harder sale. Some of us libertarians, not speaking for myself, some voted for Trump and a little bit are having a little buyer's remorse on that. Yeah, because they feel they didn't get quite what they bargained for on that. What do you think to say to libertarians who might be thinking that, we got promised some things, got some things that I agree with Trump, like the cryptocurrency stuff we enjoy, certain things, but obviously we're not a big fan of the foreign policy, but that doesn't have anything to do with you. So what would you say to libertarians who might have a little fear of that?
Well, I'll just tell you my story, very briefly. I mean, I'll lay it all out and then you can dig into whatever bit you think is most interesting and where you want to take it. But just in terms of for those who don't know me, they may just know me from Fox News or wherever. My background has been very formative in these views. My parents are Hungarian and they were refugees from communism in Hungary. Both my parents and my stepfather. I was born in England, but really had that seared into me, the horrors of a brutal, authoritarian, totalitarian communist regime. We went back to Hungary every year and I saw the difference between freedom and oppression. My first political memory was Margaret Thatcher towards the end of the 1970s in England. And I ended up in the end, I worked hard, I grew up in a regular working class immigrant household, but made it to Oxford University, studied philosophy, politics, and economics. My foundational text at the time, actually at the suggestion of Margaret Thatcher, not to me personally, although I didn't work for the Conservative Party and later and met her, but I remember reading an interview where she said, you've got to read two books to understand what I'm all about: The Road to Serfdom and The Constitution of Liberty, two books by Hayek. And I did. And I still think of, especially The Road to Serfdom, which I think is what we're on in California, which is the inevitability of disaster when you have the centralization of power in the hands of arrogant bureaucrats and technocrats who think that they can run everything from on high. Central planning is always a disaster. And that book really was a foundational text really for my political philosophy over the years. But more than that, there's a personal dimension to it as well, which is that my now wife, Rachel Whetstone, her grandfather was a guy called Sir Anthony Fisher in England. And he was in the World War II, he was a fighter pilot in the Royal Air Force. He saw his brother shot down in front of him. And after the war in 1945, the British voted to kick out Winston Churchill and install a socialist government that started centralizing and nationalizing everything. And he was very upset by this. He thought, well, why did my brother die? Why did we make all these sacrifices if we're just going to give up freedom? Friedrich Hayek at the time was teaching at the London School of Economics. So this guy, Anthony Fisher, went to see him and said, I've been reading your work. I want to help advance these ideas. I'm going to run for office, run as a Conservative member of Parliament. Hayek said to him, don't do that. We got to win the battle of ideas first. You should set up a think tank. So he did. This guy, my grandfather-in-law, is a successful businessman, entrepreneur. He founded the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs. That is the leading free market think tank at the time in the world. That's where Margaret Thatcher learned about free market economics and values. But then later, this guy, Sir Anthony Fisher, his second wife, I believe, was American, and then they moved to the US. He founded the Manhattan Institute in New York. Then he moved to the West Coast and founded PRI, the Pacific Research Institute, our leading free market think tank here on the West Coast. He's an amazing intellectual entrepreneur. In fact, PRI, its annual dinner for donors and supporters, is called the Sir Anthony Fisher Dinner. So it's not just something I feel intellectually, it's in my family. And I think when you look at what's going on in California, the central task for me as the next governor is taking this bloated, bureaucratic, nanny state government that's bossing us around from morning till night, telling us how to live, how to raise our kids, how to run our businesses, how to, what kind of house to live in, what kind of car to drive, how to cook our food, what stoves you can have. It's just insane. And the cost of it is insane, not just in personal freedom that's been taken away, but the economic cost. I mean, the reason that we have the highest taxes in the country for the worst results is because the endless expansion of government on the watch of these Democrats, uncontrolled, unrestrained. They just pass whatever insane legislation they want with no real pushback from the governor. And so that really will be my central mission. I got to be honest with you. If anyone doesn't know me, talk to my wife, my sons, there's almost nothing I hate more just in everyday life than ridiculous, pointless, arbitrary rules, bureaucracy, being told what to do, other people, being bossed around. I hate anyone or anything that is overmighty, whether that's big government, big business, I firmly believe in the decentralization of power. And that's the agenda that I want to bring to California.
It definitely sounds like music to my ears. That's for sure. I recently, I guess last year, I had my music teacher was from Hungary, and I had a podcast about that, talking about, when he defected from Hungary, and, he talked about all that tyranny over there. And I really hoped it would strike a message with people here in California, because, as you mentioned, what the Road to Serfdom talks about is how centralized power is always corrupted. And
exactly
you couldn't get a better example of it here in California.
Exactly. And it's just, we just did a survey. So a few months ago, as part of my campaign, I set up what I call Cal Doge, just borrowing the brand from what the Elon and so on did in at the federal level, with mixed results. I think we could all agree. But Cal Doge, we're not elected yet. This is just a volunteer effort. We're going through the books and the numbers and the records that we can see, and we've published a number of fraud reports about the theft of public money and a number of bloat reports looking at the bloat of the bureaucracy and the government in Sacramento. The one we just published this week estimated the total cost of the bureaucratic regulatory state in California, and our estimate is $745 billion of economic activity held back every single year. That's $55,000 per household. Just to put that into context, if we got rid of that, then we wouldn't be, as Gavin Newsom and the others keep boasting, the fourth biggest economy in the world. We'd be the third biggest. We'd actually overtake Germany. And so there's an enormous cost to all this. And that's why, actually, in many ways, if we can just, the hard part is going to be getting elected, because the Democrat machine is very powerful. It's a long time since a Republican was elected statewide. Californians are out of the habit of doing that. I think we can do it. Maybe we can talk about my reasons for believing it's possible. But then once there, actually, the job is not that complicated. The job is to stop doing stupid things. It is to stop the government endlessly bossing us around. Just leave us alone. We have everything we need in this state. to be incredibly successful. The greatest place on earth. We've got amazing natural beauty, we've got the best weather, we've got fantastic people, we've got a culture of hustle and innovation. We've got the rebel spirit of California that is what led to the fact that we created all these amazing industries that have changed the world. People who don't accept convention, do things different. We've got all those advantages. But so all you've got to do is lift off this kind of stifling boot of government on the neck of California. And then it's really not, we're not in search of some complicated policy remedy here. It's just, stop it, leave us alone. Just dismantle this bloated bureaucratic nanny state government.
Yeah, Newsom likes to brag about the size of the economy, whatever it is, like the 5th largest or whatever you just said.
Yeah.
And I like to joke, and he says it's because of what we do in California. I say it's despite that.
Well, more than that. I mean, you're completely right, but there's another way of looking at it as well, which is that it's statistically true that we're the 4th biggest economy, just as measured by the GDP, total GDP. But there's 2 things to bear in mind about that. Number one, it's really skewed by a very small number of giant tech companies that, they're very successful. And I'm, especially now with the AI boom, fully supportive of that. I'd want to help all businesses succeed in California, but they don't create very many jobs. That's why we can simultaneously have the 4th biggest economy in the world, but the highest unemployment rate in America of all 50 states, as well as the highest poverty rate. But the other really important, probably the most important part of that statistic is the size of the economy includes the size of the government. And so the way they've achieved this scale is not healthy. They've doubled the budget of the state of California in the last 10 years, and everything's gotten worse. You look at what's going on with the economy in California. Basically, since the end of the pandemic, there have been the amount of net private sector job creation is basically zero. All the expansion is either in government, bureaucracy and all that, or healthcare. That's it. It's really unhealthy.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of restaurants and stuff that have closed down here in Los Angeles, legacy restaurants and stuff. I mean, Los Angeles politics is, you add that on top of California politics, it's a disaster down here. So, I mean, there are tons of businesses closing down. So what would you do to make it more friendly for them or for tech people? But I know a lot of people also are concerned about, like, say, data centers and that kind of stuff.
Well, I think that, when you, here's how I see it. I mean, generally, the 3 structural forces that are making it, just impossible to run a business. And that's not some hyperbole. If you look at Chief Executive Magazine, they do an annual survey of business conditions in America. California has been voted 50th out of 50 states for business climate. I think it's now 11 years in a row, something like that. And so and that's why so many businesses are leaving and investments not coming. And that's why we have the highest unemployment rate and the highest poverty rate. So improving the business climate is a really, really foundational goal. And to do that, we got to understand how they've messed it up. And to me, of course, we could say, broadly speaking, too much government. I mean, I did an event the other week. It was the Hillsdale College supporters and friends of Hillsdale College and donors and so on, annual meeting. And I was given a slot for an hour. And on the program, it said, Steve Hilton, California, diagnosis and prescription. I said, I made a joke when I stood up. You've given me an hour. I don't need an hour. Diagnosis, too much government. Prescription, less government. It's actually pretty straightforward. But actually within that, I think there are 3. The more I look at these different policy areas, energy, water, business climate, housing, all the different things that are going wrong, there's 3 structural components that we've got to deal with. Number 1 is what they call their climate agenda. Number 2 is union power. And number 3 is litigation. Sometimes they all come together. And actually one example of that is housing, where we've got the highest housing costs in the country, the lowest home ownership, which is shameful for California, the home of the California dream. We should be best on this. Mm-hmm. It's actually the number 1 reason people are leaving the state, which is high housing costs. It's just so impossible to live here. And it's so sad. We did a campaign event at Cal Poly the other day in San Luis Obispo. And you talk to the students there and young people, and it's just so heartbreaking when they look you in the eye and says, yeah, I'm going to have to move. I'm never going to be able to own a home in California. So, they say it's a statement of fact. We're losing the next generation. Now, why? It's a combination of things that bring in those three structural forces. Number one, it just costs more to build the exact same building, whatever it is, house, apartment, industrial, whatever it is. It costs 2 or 3 times more to build in California just because of the building codes, the specific regulations that are mandated, endless different mandates for, electrification and solar and energy things, and just endless bureaucracy in the building codes. That's number one. Number two is taxes on house building that go into their bottomless money pit. They're called impact fees. They used to be a few $1,000s or something like that per unit. Now the Turner Center at Berkeley, the main expert center on housing in California, estimates that impact fees, they're charged to developers, but they end up on the price of the home, add up to 20% for the cost of a new home. That's basically taxes on housing that are, so you could think of them as stealth. You've got to hear about wealth taxes. They're stealth taxes. They're not, you don't see them, but they're built in. The third is litigation, is lawsuits. You've got a situation today where in California, almost anything you try to do, you building, expanding, whatever, you're going to be hit by a lawsuit. And they're mostly filed under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which was passed a long time ago, 1970, when Reagan was governor. But it's now been completely abused because there's a private right of action under CEQA. Anyone can file a lawsuit. 70% of CEQA lawsuits are filed to block housing. Most of those are filed by unions to use as leverage to extract what they call project labor agreements, where they demand either two things, euphemisms, skilled and trained workers, that means union members only, or prevailing wage, which is 2 or 3 times higher than the market rate. So that massively increases the cost. That's the interplay of environmentalism, unions, and lawsuits. And then the final one is this ideology of density, where they're saying, again, it's a classic example of authoritarian bossiness. They're trying to impose their worldview on us. And they're saying, there's only one way we want you to live. You have to live with dense development in the urban core. We don't want you driving. You've got to take public transportation or walk or cycle or whatever. And they sort of want to turn California into, you hear them talk about it like this, into Europe or something. Well, I know Europe. This is not how California developed. We developed in a very different way, building outwards. The magnificent, that's the California, they call it sprawl. I call it the California dream. A single family home, you can enjoy the weather, and they don't like that. They want to impose their worldview. And so they're restricting where you can build. And that, of course, increases the price of the land, but it also means you're in these endless fights with NIMBY-YIMBY fights. They're trying to shove apartment buildings into suburban neighborhoods. People don't want that. And so nothing happens. Whereas my plan is just to, go with the grain of human nature and say we want to live in single family homes in California. Not everyone, of course, but particularly when people have a family. So let's allow construction outwards. Let's expand. There's plenty of room in California. Only 6% of our land is developed, which is the lowest in the country. We have the highest density now. You could increase it to 7% and have room for 10 million households in single family homes in quarter-acre lots. So we've got to get rid of this ideology of just, imposing this worldview. And so that story around housing, I think, is a really good example of how these different forces come into play once you actually unpick it. But it all goes back to this sort of central point, which is we've got this bloated nanny state bureaucratic government. And it's a recipe for corruption and these interest groups taking over the system.
Yeah, I agree. They really want to make it hard to own a house here or keep owning a house, fees and just everything, doing the upkeep and, things like that. You get the hell taxed out of you when you do some home repairs and stuff, as opposed to the regular cost that you'd normally deal with. But how would you say as a Republican governor, how would you deal with the supermajority of Democrats that could deal, overturn a veto or something like that? They put a crazy budget out there.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I'd say to that. First of all, it's the governor that writes the budget, so you start the process, and that's actually the first step in bringing about the changes we need. And my first budget will include the elements of my plan, including cutting taxes a lot. My tax plan is your first $100,000 tax-free. Gonna get rid of the $800 a year small business registration fee that drives people crazy. You want to start a business in California, the first thing you do, you have to pay the government $800 just for existing. It's outrageous. The vehicle registration is off the chart. They're just gouging us for money, and nothing comes from it because we have the worst outcomes. There's a whole set of tax changes I'll be putting in. Now, you're right that the legislature it's a process of negotiation. You submit it in January, then in May, you have what's called the May revise, and then it goes back and forth, and it has to be done by the middle of the year. But the governor has a line item veto. And you're right that the legislature with a 2/3 majority can overturn a veto. But the interesting thing is there has not been a veto override by the legislature since the 1980s. They don't like doing it. And actually, I'm going to be very aggressive here because I see my role as stopping this incoming tide of ever-rising bloat and bureaucracy. So I'm excited about using the veto very, very aggressively. So that may change their calculation. They may be very, excited about overturning the vetoes this time around. But that means they have to defend their position. See, what happens right now is that they're just churning out so much nonsense and bloat, and no one ever looks at it. Like we did an analysis last year of what they passed in the legislature, the bills, because that's where a lot of this is coming from. They just churn out legislation, and it adds to complexity and hassle to the point where the businesses are just, driven crazy by this stuff and end up, if they can, leaving. So the legislature passed last session, 1,118 bills. So we printed them out, and I'm not very tall, but we did an event at the Capitol. It's double my height.
Oh man!
So obviously, no one is reading this stuff. And this is where the corruption comes in, because basically, my interactions with Sacramento are very clear now. What happens, which is the lobbyists and the interest groups, the unions, the climate activists, the corporate interests, basically control the legislative process. They buy up, not even necessarily the legislators, it's the staff, the committee members, the people who actually do the work. They basically write their own bills. And then they find a legislator to sponsor it. And they don't have to do very much to get them to do that. Take them for a nice weekend golf retreat. That seems to do the job. So then they find a legislator to sponsor it, and then it all just goes through because they've got a 2/3 majority. It's really corrupt. And so what's been happening for years is that no one stops it. No one challenges it, which is why you've got this volume of this nonsense. And no one reads it. So they just go. I mean, often you've had members and they've been asked about bills that they've sponsored. They don't know what's in it. And it's really bad. And that's why we've just got to be I will be incredibly aggressive at saying no. And I've got different versions of what I will do here. I haven't quite decided. I'm just sort of thinking about it now, which is one version of it is I won't sign anything I haven't read. That alone just slows the whole thing down because it's humanly impossible to read the volume of stuff that they're churning out. Another version of it is I won't sign anything that doesn't actively make life easier, simpler, more affordable for California families and businesses. Because, if there's a bill that's deregulatory in nature, of course I want to sign it. So I don't want to have some blanket rule that says no new legislation, because maybe there's some good legislation. But I think that the reason I'm talking about all of this is I really need everyone listening, to understand where I'm coming from. I really hate this stuff. I hate bureaucracy. I hate this kind of bloat and arrogant bossing around of people and businesses. And so you're going to be electing someone who's ferocious about pushing back on all of this and really looking forward to the fight, not running away from it.
Yeah, I think that will ring good to most libertarians, especially since the Democrat frontrunner, his if I remember correctly, his COVID policies were terrible.
His what?
His stances on COVID and things like that were terrible.
Oh, terrible. He was a disaster. I mean, look, this guy is exactly what you don't want. Is Javier Becerra. He's basically a career politician, part of the Democrat machine. He's been a career politician for 36 years, done nothing else. Made his way through legislature, Congress. He was appointed Attorney General for California, appointed Biden's health secretary. Total disaster. Pushing masks for 2-year-olds. Just the worst kind of nonsense. And he's a complete mediocrity, actually. He's just like these other machine politicians like Karen Bass and Joe Biden himself or Gavin Newsom. They don't really believe in anything. They just want to, climb the ladder and get along. And so they just spend their entire career pandering to the interest groups that control the party, the unions and the climate left and the trial lawyers who fund them. I mean, why do we have so much litigation in California? Because trial lawyers are the second biggest donors to Democrat politicians. So they just do their bidding. It's totally corrupt. And I just think that that's a very important, part of the story here. It's just to take on this corrupt machine that's just been, it's had its own way without any kind of pushback or challenge.
Yeah. I came to the Libertarian Party from the left. I really like environmental issues and came from a union family, but I see how unions are not helping California, and the green lobby is just they're just wrong. And that was one of the things I really loved about what Tom Woodard was doing in his campaign, was his policies for a greener California, and just his environmental work was just awesome, what he did in Mexico and stuff like that. And I'm happy to hear you adopt that, because that was one of my favorite things of his. No,
I love it. And I love what I love about, this is maybe where there's an overlap with libertarianism and conservatism, or certainly that's how I understand it, is things that go with the grain of human nature. You're not trying to impose your worldview. You're letting people determine their own destiny, and that applies to nature as well. And I love the thrust of Tom's policy there on, you don't have to get into some argument about climate change and deny climate change or whatever. Just say, look, the way we're going about it is stupid. We're imposing incredibly high costs, whether that's gas prices, electric bills, the cost of housing, all these things, that make it impossible for regular families to live and operate here, or businesses to operate, in the name of a climate agenda where you're not even delivering on those goals, because you're not really affecting carbon dioxide emissions particularly, and certainly not affecting global temperatures. Whereas if you planted trees, and he's got a very ambitious plan for that, which I've 100% endorsed, and he will run when I'm governor. He will be in charge of that and making it happen. That itself, the goal is very ambitious, but in line with what's been done before in America, planting 3 billion with a B, trees in California, but a whole kind of program of volunteers and young people getting involved in conservation. It's a beautiful vision, and it achieves the left's climate goals, but in a natural way, without imposing all these costs on businesses and families and workers.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. The whole idea of it. I think if more Californians heard it and understood what he was talking about, it's glorious.
Well, it's in the last stages of the primary, and so we've put the plan out there. Mm-hmm. But I understand that in these last stages, I don't particularly like it, but the entire conversation is basically about the polls and who's up and who's down, and what's the math, and who's in the top two and who's not. That's basically, you struggle to get anything else out there, honestly, at this stage of an election. But once we're past the primary, which I hope I will be and planning to be, it's looking good, but not in the bag. So we got to vote for this change. Then we'll have time in the general election to really explore and unpack some of these policies. And I think that's one that's going to be actually it's not just a great idea. It's actually going to be really useful politically, I think, for bringing people on board and showing we've got a different approach, but one where, I mean, I think that's one of the key things in politics. You've got to, make a connection on the basis of values and goals and say, look, we agree, we want the same thing. We just have a different way of getting there.
Yeah. We want to breathe clean air too,
Exactly.
So I guess another question I wanted to ask you is, I assume I know where you're going to go with this, but what about this damn train to nowhere?
Oh, no, so let's just, I mean, it's actually a monument to the arrogance to their arrogance and incompetence, both of those things. And actually, there's an ideological component as well, because the original motivation for the train, for high-speed rail, was in fact their climate agenda, where they wanted to get cars off the roads. But even in their own calculations, the actual reduction in vehicle miles traveled was going to be tiny. So it's just a classic example of some ideological scheme that made no sense in the first place. So let's just remind ourselves of the numbers. So they, this was passed in a ballot initiative, and it was all set up. Money was appropriated, and here's what they said: that it would be open in 2020, and the budget would be $33 billion, and you'd go from San Francisco to LA in 2.5 hours. That was the pitch, right? Here we are. It's 2026, so 6 years after it was supposed to be open. The latest business plan, as they laughably call it, is this: you take a regular train on not high speed from San Francisco to Merced, at the top of the Central Valley. Then it's high-speed rail from Merced to Bakersfield, down the middle of the Central Valley, the flattest part of the whole route, which, by the way, they haven't even laid any tracks yet. They've spent half the budget. They've already spent $15 billion. Not a single mile of track has been laid. Still, let's keep going. So you've got the high-speed rail, which they now say will be done from Merced to Bakersfield, and then Bakersfield to LA, wait for it, it's a bus. That a lot. I do that drive the whole time. I'm in Bakersfield right now speaking to you. We just drove from LA last night. I mean, no traffic last night. It took 1 hour 45 minutes. You can do that. And by the way, that's on the west side of LA. You can do that drive alone, and it's 2.5 hours, no problem. So instead of 2.5 hours from San Francisco to LA by 2020 for $30 billion, here's the budget now: $231 billion. And if you're lucky, this whole insane scheme will be open by the end of the 2030s. So it's just an absolute monument to the arrogance, incompetence, and ideological extremism of this Democrat machine. Here's the good news: we did a report on this week with Cal Doge, led by my colleague who's running for state controller, Herb Morgan. It's not just insane, stupid, and wasteful. This is illegal. And here's why. The original legislation setting all this up required that it operate without public subsidy. If you dig into their business plan, it states clearly that they've abandoned that, and their own projections show that they can't make money, can't break even, and will require public subsidy for the operation of this thing. In other words, that it's illegal. And so we announced this week that we will stop payments, all payments on day one will be stopped until they can meet the original criteria that were laid out, which of course they never will. But it's got to stop. I mean, I know some people say, well, they've built all this infrastructure, you've got to finish it. No. I mean, that money, I mean, look, they spent $15 billion. They want to spend another $215 billion. I mean, that's nearly the entire general fund of the state of California. No, we're not throwing good money after bad. And, I mean, I don't know if I'm just passing this along in the spirit of reporting, if you like, but someone I spoke to who's close to Elon, actually, I think he said it publicly, so I don't think I'm revealing anything confidential, that Elon Musk believes that he can build a tunnel. The Boring Company, I remember one of his businesses, and they're doing quite good prototypes now in Vegas and elsewhere, that he can do a tunnel. They used to call it a hyperloop. I don't think they're calling it that now, where you can, from San Francisco to LA for $5 billion. That's his estimate.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'd love to explore that if that's possible. Great, but we can't be throwing good money after bad, and if the extent that we're going to be investing in transportation infrastructure, let's do it in things that people need and want, like expanding the 99 highway that I travel on it the whole time. That would help alleviate traffic congestion. Things that help people. We are. I know that it goes going back to this imposition of an ideological blueprint on how they want us to live. They've got this incredible desire to force us to live in their own ideological straitjacket, that they literally want California to be some other place that it isn't. They want it to be like Europe, where everyone's taking the train everywhere and whatever. It's just not like that. I mean, I know all that. I grew up and I love high-speed rail in Europe. I used it all the time. Get train from London to Paris makes total sense. From Barcelona to Madrid makes total sense, because that's how those cities have developed. Very dense. The London Underground was built, before California, just barely when California existed as a state. It's just how it's developed. What's the point of this high speed? Let's just imagine that they even built the thing. Where do you go in LA? So you go to what? Union Station. Right. Then what? It takes another hour to get to the west side, if that's where you want to go. It's just not like that. California is not like that. And I'm sick of these people, these ideologues, just trying to, turn us into something we're not. Why I want to be a governor that supports the job of the government is to enable people to live their lives the way they want to live, free of constraint and hassle, bureaucracy, and cost to the maximum extent possible.
Yeah, Elon wanted to do something like that in Los Angeles and build a tunnel from Union Station to, I think, LAX to relieve some of the traffic. And of course, the environmentalists got him, and that got shot down pretty quick. So
right.
Yeah, we could definitely use that kind of thought process here to make things. Obviously, we want to take the environment into consideration, but I don't think a tunnel underground was going to destroy anything in the environment.
No, I mean, there's again, going back to Europe. I mean, one of the cities, it's a small city, so it's not a exact comparison, but there's a lot. I think when I think of tunnels, Oslo, the capital of Norway, is very much like that. You've got it's a very peaceful green city. Okay, small, big caveat, but a lot of the driving is in tunnels with little bridges. It works, and so I think we should be. The one general point I would make is that I would love to get back to a time. I mean, there was a time in the 50s and 60s, you could say, when California was leading the world on these kinds of things. We were building incredible things. The State Water Project, bringing water from the north to the south. The UC campuses, the suburbs of Southern California, the freeways. We were inventing and building the future. Now, of course, we're still inventing the future in the sense of technology and software. But in terms of the physical world around us, we're just totally stuck in the past. I mean, we've got water infrastructure, for example, that hasn't been added to in decades. We've got the same exact water infrastructure that for a population of 40 million that we had for a population of 20 million. No wonder everything's so expensive. So I think that one of the aspects of the removal of all these bureaucratic barriers that are in the way of the things we want to do is to enable us to build amazing things like we used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Something else I know libertarians are thinking about is say legalization of psilocybin and mushrooms and stuff like that. Where do you stand on that?
It's interesting. To be completely honest with you, I haven't thought about it very much, truly. I've really been, focused on the economic mess that we're in. So I know there's a lot of debate around that. I'm open to that, honestly. I mean, I'm generally, as I say, libertarian in my outlook on things. So I think that we should probably have more conversation about it, honestly. I haven't made up my mind. I'm very open to it.
Yeah, I know I'm very pro for it. So that, something like that would definitely, I know for a lot of libertarians, that would move the needle in your direction, I think.
Right.
We're against the war on drugs. And, a lot of people think of libertarians when we talk about the war on drugs, that all of a sudden everything's going to turn into Seattle or Portland. And that's not, in my opinion, that's not the case. Just like alcohol, alcohol is legal, but what you do while you're drunk is not. So I think if we only just enforced, regular laws like here in California, like in Los Angeles, like where somebody's messed up on drugs and the cops will just pass them by. I work in the parks and I see people wrecking stuff all the time.
Yes.
That's the kind of stuff that needs to be taken care of.
I think the one thing that gives me pause on some of this is I suppose here's how I think about it, which is I definitely can say strongly that as far as I'm concerned, drugs in the broadest sense, it's not the drugs that are the problem, it's addiction that's the problem, and the behavior that can result from that and the impact on people's lives. And they're very different things. Drug taking and a drug addiction are very different. I think addiction, you look at the homeless situation and that's like a huge factor there. But that's separate to the question of drugs. Not everyone who takes drugs either is or becomes an addict, so you've got to separate those two things. That's really my sort of starting point. The other thing that I just think about in this context of drugs is what's going on with weed and the legalization there, where again, what you hear, and I haven't dug into it enough, is that just the strains and the strength of what's available is very different to what you had in the past, and therefore there's something we got to be careful of, particularly in relation to younger people. So I don't know. I think that I haven't come to a final conclusion on any of this.
Well, I can vouch for the weed. It is pretty strong, and I love it. When I go in, I try to get the strongest stuff, but it doesn't have any negative effects on that. I don't like how I don't know, some conservatives look at it as like, oh, they're going to try to protect me from my cannabis, and that just drives me out of my mind.
Yes, and I've had very good conversations with the cannabis industry actually in California about some of the issues that they're facing. There are sort of a combination of regulatory barriers, but also failure to act on the criminal gang-related aspects of the cannabis industry that's cannibalizing their business. And so I've had some really good briefing on that from the industry, and I'm very sympathetic to their arguments.
Yeah, the taxes are really high. I think the state like Michigan, they have really low taxes. They don't have any over there.
One of my favorite moments, I got to tell you, was in this whole sort of years I've been engaged in policy and politics in California. A while back when I was hosting my show on Fox News, I noticed that a little bit after legalization in California, some Democrat legislators in the state legislature, this is years ago, I can't remember who, had a press conference. They called on the government to reduce the tax on cannabis. Mm-hmm. And their argument was, if you reduce the tax, you'll raise revenue because there'll be more economic activity. Mm-hmm. In other words, the Laffer curve, which for decades, obviously the Laffer curve, a name, for Art Laffer, the economist who invented it, made that argument broadly across the economy that the lower tax rates will lead to higher tax revenue because it increases economic activity. That was the foundation of the Reagan, tax and Thatcher tax cutting plans that the left derided as trickle down economics. Anyway, it made me laugh that finally, after all these years, the left was suddenly embracing the Laffer curve when it came to cannabis. And funnily enough, I got hold of Art Laffer, who's wonderful. I've got to know very well in the years since then. But I had him on my show, and I said, Art, can you believe it? Finally, they've come round. The left have come round to your point of view. Did you ever think it would be cannabis that did it?
Yeah, that is pretty funny. That's what. Yeah, however they get there, right?
Exactly.
That's funny. Something else I'd seen, I'll be honest, I was all about Tom's campaign, so I didn't really read into a lot of other stuff, and a lot of what I had heard, was, secondhand or something like that. I had seen something about, I don't know your stance on, obviously as a conservative, I assume where you're at on things like, abortion and things like that. What's your stance on that? Because I read something like it's like, say somebody came here from Mississippi or someplace where it's illegal, that you were okay with extradition or something like that. I'd read in an article.
Well, it's a complicated. I was asked the question. It's Louisiana. It's a real case, and it's actually a really complicated legal case because you're in. So there's two things I'd say about it. From my basic attitude in terms of this kind of questions, not even broader than just abortion, is that I'm a strong believer, as I said at the beginning, in the decentralization of power, and I've always been a very big advocate for the 10th Amendment, which isn't discussed nothing like as much as it should be. I think talk about the First Amendment, Second Amendment all the time, 14th Amendment. No one ever talks about the 10th Amendment, which enshrines the principle of decentralization and federalism. It's which basically says the powers that are not in the Constitution, I'm quoting now, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And I think that we've got a massively over-centralized federal government right now. All of these things that are done by the feds, I think, should be at the state level entirely, not just a little bit, but health, human services, housing, urban development, all this stuff, obviously education. Why does the federal government have anything to do with any of that? It makes no sense to me at all. So I'm a very strong advocate of decentralization and states being able to, and I think that's the only thing that makes sense in a country as big as ours. So when you come to this, what happened on abortion was that the Dobbs ruling obviously put this question back in the hands of the states to decide. And I agree with that. And different states have decided in completely different ways. So Louisiana's gone in one direction, very restrictive, and California's gone in another direction, very permissive. And I think that's how it should work. Now, whether I agree with one or other is actually irrelevant to this question, because what I'm saying is I respect that right of states to do their own thing. And just as I wouldn't want Louisiana dictating California's policies on anything, on abortion or anything else, I don't think it's right for California to try and dictate policy in Louisiana. Our system falls apart if we start to have states trying to boss other states around. When it comes to this question of extradition, so that's the principle on all issues. On this one of abortion, the complicating factor is that you've got two competing legal things going on. Here in California, when abortion was enshrined in the state constitution in 2022, at the same time, I think they passed another separate piece of legislation called the SHIELD Act, which directly shields doctors. Specifically, it's on abortion and trans surgeries for kids. Those are the two areas. And they basically wanted to create a kind of sanctuary for doctors who did that in California, even if they did it in other states. And so that's the law. That law was passed. But it totally conflicts with other laws. And the other really complicating factor on this case is that this is about mifepristone, which is the prescription of abortion medication through the mail, which the Biden administration deregulated. Previously, you had to have an actual in-person appointment, I think, with two doctors. I can't remember the exact rules. Now it's like, no, you can have an online consultation and get it through the mail. That whole thing, of course, totally is an end run around the logic of the Dobbs decision, which is that individual states could have different regimes for abortion rules. And this basically sets up one for the whole country, which is through the postal service, effectively. So that's going through the courts. So it's honestly a very complicated situation. And I'm right in the middle of conversations with my legal team about this. Part of my legal team is, Governor Wilson's senior lawyer. So I actually don't know yet where we'll come out, and it will be it's an actual case, and it is true that it's the governor who will rule on it, but with the legal position is unclear because you've got a federal case on mifepristone going through the system. I think it's at the Fifth Circuit right now, so maybe get to the Supreme Court. Maybe I just don't know where this is going to end up. It's a really complicated decision for the whole country, actually. And this is just one instance of it, this Louisiana doctor.
Yeah. I fall on the side of pro-choice on the issue, but I also fall on the side of responsibility. I had surgery, so I don't or a procedure, so I don't have to worry about those kind of issues. So I wish more people who, felt like me would, be a little bit more responsible about things, so that these things don't even have to be an issue on that thing. But
I agree. Well, that's what I always say, which is that, that's the starting point, was to do whatever we can to avoid unwanted pregnancy in the first place.
Yeah.
I strongly agree with that.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about it. If somebody came over here, like, say, I don't know, something was illegal. I don't know, like, I can't think of a good example. I mean, like, say gambling's illegal someplace and they go to Vegas or something like that. I think people ought to be able to go someplace and do something to get a procedure. But like you said, this has to do more with the mail. So how does California, like, if the pills are mailed from California to Louisiana, that would be the person who is in trouble, not the person who's in Louisiana? Like, how does that?
Yes, it's the doctor. It's the actual doctor. So it's a California doctor and Louisiana who prescribed it to someone in Louisiana, mm-hmm. which is against the law in Louisiana, and mm-hmm. so they're calling for the extradition of the mm-hmm. doctor and so but this hasn't been tested. Mm-hmm. Because this is going to be there's an explosion of this going on. This is this is just one case, and Louisiana, to a certain extent, I think, is using it as a test case, and so we'll have to see what happens. But California has its own law. We have our own law called the Shield Law, which creates a kind of sanctuary for specifically for medical practitioners, including and it's on these two cases, abortion and trans surgery for kids. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, we can make our decision on that here in California, and we have on abortion. And the next governor can't change that. Whatever position they personally hold, it's right. Now the right to abortion is in California's state constitution. That's it. You're not going to change that except through another ballot initiative requiring a 2/3 majority vote, which is what happened in that case. And so it's not actually about that. It's about whether we have the right to undermine the choice that Louisiana's people made about how abortion should be regulated in their state.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I know as a libertarian, we always want to kind of undermine the system of authoritarian, so we kind of tend to lean that way. But
right.
But I mean, I guess libertarians, I think they're about 50-50, because I think there's a pretty decent argument. Legitimate arguments on both sides of the issue, where there's a lot of nuances to it. So
there really is, and actually, funnily enough, it's one of those things where it came up in one of the TV debates, and it was like they do these quick lightning round, yes or no, and I think,
yeah, right.
It's so not amenable to a yes or no answer. It really is. And I know that that's not a dodge. It's just really it's truly complicated. And I don't think, with competing values and good faith arguments on both sides, and I just think that got to be honest about these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, libertarians are big for the medical freedom, but at the
yes, instinctively that's where I'm at too. Yeah. But I also think that as I said, I'm a strong believer in decentralized power. And if Louisianans voted one way and we voted another way, then that's something I think we got to take into account.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's those things, as a politician, you just got to deal with those things. Man, it's a minefield out there.
Yes.
So I know your time's short today. Is there anything in particular you'd like to get out there before we have to wrap up or anything?
Well, I just want to say, first of all, how much I've enjoyed the conversation. It's been great to have this kind of conversation. And secondly, even if you've got people watching and listening say, I'm not sure about this Steve Hilton guy, I think I've explained where I'm coming from on most things. I really do have that libertarian disposition. It's deep within me, the skepticism of centralized control. But I think that the one thing I would say is that it really is unarguable is I'm a lot better than the alternative. The alternative is more of the same, I mean, that's the choice. It's not me or Tom Woodard. That's why Tom endorsed me. It's me or Javier Becerra. Or at a stretch, me or Tom Steyer. Or actually, even worse, a general election with Tom Steyer versus Javier Becerra. When you have these candidates out competing each other on left. That's the actual choice. And so I think that there's really no question at all. No one should have any doubt that I will be strongly different and in a more libertarian direction than any of the other. There's only, let's put it this way. Right now, at the stage we are with this governor's race, it's very clear from all the polls, like some are up, there's marginal differences between them. But the one thing that is really clear is that it's now a 3-horse race for governor. It's a 3-horse race. Myself, Javier Becerra, Tom Steyer. Both of those would be either more of the same or even worse. And so at this point, whatever may have happened, in a way, the time for debates and arguments, evaluating the candidates, that's all gone. We've had a year of that. It's time for choosing now and voting. And if we want change in California, if we want to move away from this broken model of left-wing progressive governance that's just grown this monstrosity of a bloated nanny state bureaucracy, we've got to vote for change. And I'm the only candidate for change that has a realistic possibility of getting in the top 2. Then it's a whole other fight. We've got to beat the Democrat machine. But if we're not in it, then we can't beat them at all. And so my final message to people is you've got to vote. Like, actually, don't sit it out. Don't sit it out and just let it drift into another 4 years of this Democrat nightmare. Please vote, vote, vote. There's a real energy for change in California. I'm seeing it all over the state. We do our events, loads of people coming out. You see it in LA with Spencer Pratt and the response to his campaign. We've really, I think this could be a year when we really upset the predictions in California. But it's not going to happen unless people actually go and vote for it. So we've got a few more days. Please go vote. And let's make this happen.
Yeah, I know, like you said, I think a lot of times people feel like it even seems like it, that people aren't voting for anything; they're voting against things. And I want to vote for freedom. I mean, that's why I'm a libertarian. And
right.
It's painfully obvious that that's why Tom dropped out, is that libertarians don't have the backing yet in California to win. So we have to be a little pragmatic. And, there's 30-something thousand or close to 40,000 registered libertarians in Los Angeles County. So right. There's a lot of people here who we call them small L libertarians. They're not necessarily party members. And I think the Libertarian Party needs to speak to them. I think this podcast needs to speak to people like that who have to deal with, they don't have to deal with party politics. They have to deal with their income taxes and their tax and their business taxes and these kind of things. And as libertarians, we need to really talk to people about, making the right choice and recognizing that, setting out sometimes isn't necessarily going to help anything unless you're a collapsitarian and just want to see the whole system burn and start over again.
Yes. I understand that. Let's not. I think we got a real shot this time of making a big change. So let's not waste it.
Yeah. So, well, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I hope when you're elected governor, you'll come back on the show.
Of course. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you want to give out any of your information where people can?
Oh, thank you. Yes. SteveHiltonForGovernor.com. FOR. SteveHiltonForGovernor.com. You can follow me on social media at Steve Hilton X on most of the platforms. But as I keep saying, don't sit it out. Vote. Got to vote. And don't leave it to the last minute. Try and get, drop it off, vote by mail, whatever. Although now you can vote in person. I probably would. I mean, I did a drop off last week, but now you can vote in person. I probably would do that now that they're open. But whatever you do, just make sure you vote.
Yep. Yep. Well, thanks again. And I appreciate you coming on the show.
Of course. See you soon. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for listening to the Libertarian Los Angeles on the Liberty Blues Network. You can follow me at Mad Sean Osborne on X. We're on Facebook at the Liberty Blues. You can follow my music page on Facebook at This Might Make You Mad. You can listen to my latest album, Free People, wherever you stream music. So check it out. Play it at your Liberty events. Make Liberty fun. Think of Woody Guthrie minus the socialism. And check out the Indie-tarian playlist on Spotify. It's got a lot of great libertarian musicians on there, and we could sure use a few plays to help us out with the algorithms. And we'll see you on the next episode of Libertarian Los Angeles.